All right, so today we're diving into some really fascinating history, all about the East India Company.
Okay.
And it seems like you're particularly interested in their journey from this small group of merchants to,
Yeah.
this massive force that controlled an empire.
Yeah, it's an incredible story.
Yeah.
And we're going to be looking at how the East India Company,
Okay.
or the EIC for short,
Okay.
navigated the decline of the Mughal Empire.
Yep.
How they used military force strategically.
Right.
And ultimately how they wielded immense influence over India,
Right.
leaving a really profound and often devastating impact.
Yeah, it sounds like something out of a movie.
Right.
This ambition and power struggles.
It is, yeah.
And its huge impact on India's history.
It's a massive story.
So where do we even begin with something this big?
Well, we have to start at the beginning.
Okay.
Picture a group of London merchants in 1599. They band together hoping to get in on that lucrative spice trade.
Okay, so not exactly, conquering heroes right away.
No, not at all.
I'm guessing those early days were more about the numbers than the battlefields.
Absolutely, you're right.
Yeah.
They faced stiff competition from the Dutch,
Okay.
and they had to figure out the complex world of the Mughal court,
Oh, wow.
and their initial focus was on securing trade routes and those profits.
Yeah. Make that
Conquest wasn't really on their mind at that point.
weird. Okay, so if they weren't conquering, how did they make this massive shift to ruling this huge empire?
That's where things get interesting.
Okay.
You see, the EIC had a major setback in 1772.
Okay.
They almost went bankrupt,
Oh, wow.
and they were forced to seek this bailout from the British government,
Okay.
which some historians actually consider the first mega bailout in history.
Wow, a bailout that big. I bet there were some strings attached.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
This gave the British government so much more control over the EIC. It basically turned this profit-driven company into an arm of the British Empire.
Wow, that's a huge turning point.
It really is.
So how did this newly empowered EIC start showing their dominance in India?
Well, there's this event that really stands out
Yeah.
as this catalyst
Yeah.
for the EIC's turn toward military aggression.
Okay.
It's a story that's captivated people for centuries.
Okay.
The Black Hole of Calcutta in 1756.
Ah, yes, the black hole.
Yeah.
This tiny prison cell,
Uh-huh.
a sweltering hot summer night,
Yes.
and this horrific tragedy that almost seems too awful to be true.
Yeah.
Can you tell us a little more about what actually happened?
The story is centered around Siraj-ud-Dowlah.
Okay.
He was the young Nawab of Bengal,
Okay.
known for his really volatile temperament.
Okay.
And he saw this growing influence of the EIC as a threat.
Right.
So in 1756, he attacked and captured Calcutta.
Okay.
And he imprisoned a number of British residents in this small, poorly ventilated cell.
So it was a really tiny, cramped cell where they held these British prisoners.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
However, the exact details are kind of shrouded in controversy.
Okay.
But accounts from survivors paint a very harrowing picture of suffering and death.
Wow.
So whether it was exaggerated or not, the incident was widely publicized,
Okay.
and the British used it to justify their actions that came next.
And that's where Robert Clive comes in.
Exactly.
He's a name that's always mentioned
Yes.
when we talk about the EIC's rise to power.
Yes, Robert Clive was a very ambitious EIC officer.
Okay.
He was a pivotal player in shaping the company's destiny.
Wow.
He led the force that recaptured Calcutta, and then he went on to get this decisive victory against Siraj-ud-Dowlah, the Battle of Plassey in 1757.
So Plassey was more than just a battle.
Oh, yeah.
It was this major turning point for the EIC.
It's really where they went from merchants to rulers.
Wow.
Clive, with the help of Mir Jafar,
Okay.
who was a disgruntled nobleman who betrayed Siraj-ud-Dowlah,
Wow.
they got control of Bengal's very wealthy treasury.
So it sounds like betrayal played a major role
Oh, it did.
in the EIC's rise.
Uh-huh.
Was their strategy to manipulate all the existing power structures in India?
Yeah, they were incredibly cunning.
Okay.
They knew that directly confronting Indian rulers with force wasn't always the most effective.
Okay.
So they exploited these internal rivalries and installed puppet rulers like Mir Jafar,
Right.
who were then in their debt.
Okay.
They extracted huge sums as compensation
Right.
for their supposed support, effectively draining Bengal's wealth.
This is sounding less like a company and more like some kind of shadow government
Yeah.
pulling strings behind the scenes.
Right.
What was the impact of all of this on the people of Bengal?
It was devastating, really.
Okay.
Their policies led to rampant corruption.
Wow.
Local industries declined.
Okay.
There was this crippling economic drain on Bengal.
Okay.
And the situation got so bad that it led to this horrific Bengal famine in 1770.
Oh, wow.
Which killed millions of people.
It's hard to believe that something so tragic could happen under a company that claimed to be focused on trade.
I know, it's hard to believe.
Was there any awareness of this
Yeah.
in England at the time?
There were people who spoke out.
Okay.
One of the biggest critics was William Boltz.
Okay.
He was a former EIC employee turned whistleblower.
Wow.
And he published this scathing expose in 1772
Okay.
called Considerations on Indian Affairs.
Okay.
And it detailed shocking accounts of abuse and exploitation under the EIC.
So there were people raising flags
Oh, yeah?
about the EIC's activities.
Definitely.
Did this expose have any impact back in England?
Yeah, his book had a huge impact. It
yeah.
sparked a lot of outrage.
Okay.
And it led to parliamentary inquiries into the EIC's actions in India.
Wow.
It forced people in England to start confronting this uncomfortable reality
Yeah.
about how their desire for profit was impacting millions of lives around the world.
It seems like the EIC was facing growing scrutiny,
They were.
both within India
Yes.
and back home.
Uh-huh.
And yet they still kept expanding their power and control.
They did.
How did they manage that?
Well, this is where our next key figure comes into play.
Okay.
Warren Hastings.
Yo.
He was appointed Governor General of Bengal in 1773.
Okay.
He's a complicated guy.
Okay.
He's praised for his administrative reforms
Okay.
and also accused of corruption.
So he was trying to make things better while also dealing with this crazy 18th century Indian political landscape.
Exactly.
Wow.
He was dealing with internal EIC conflict
Right.
while also overseeing their expansion
Oh.
through military campaigns
Okay.
against people like the Marathas
Okay.
and Tipu Sultan, the ruler of Mysore.
Wait, Tipu Sultan?
Yes.
I've heard that name.
Yeah,
He was a powerful ruler who really resisted the EIC, right?
absolutely.
Yeah.
He's a fascinating figure.
Okay.
He's known for his military skills
Okay.
and his efforts to modernize his army
Okay.
and his staunch resistance to British influence.
Okay.
He's going to be a key player as we move forward.
It sounds like things are about to get pretty intense.
Yeah.
But before we dive into those battles,
Yeah.
we need to talk about one more person.
Yeah.
Shah Alam II,
Okay.
the Mughal emperor.
Yes.
What was his role in all of this?
He's kind of a tragic figure in this whole story.
Okay.
He was the symbolic head of the Mughal Empire,
Right.
which was already declining when the EIC showed up.
Okay.
And he was desperately trying to hold on to his power,
Right.
caught between these ambitious regional forces like the Marathas
Okay.
and the growing ambitions of the EIC.
So he was essentially in the middle of this power struggle.
Yeah, he was.
Did he ever try to confront the EIC?
Well, there's this really poignant anecdote that shows Shah Alam's situation.
Okay.
He wrote a letter to King George III of England,
Oh.
hoping to get British support to
Okay.
rebuild his empire.
Okay.
He saw them as potential allies,
Wow.
completely misjudging their true intention.
Oh, wow.
And that letter was intercepted by Clive himself,
Oh, wow.
which really shows the EIC's cunning and Shah Alam's naivete.
That's heartbreaking.
It is.
Reaching out for help from the very force that was taking his power away.
Right.
It sounds like the Mughal Empire was on its last legs,
It was.
and the EIC was about to become the dominant power in India.
Yes, you're right.
Wow.
The EIC's expansion was fueled by ambition,
Yeah.
backed by military might.
Okay.
They were reshaping India's political landscape.
So the question is, how far were they willing to go
Exactly.
to get total control?
That is the question.
And what would be the consequences of their relentless pursuit of power? And about the EIC expanding their influence all across India?
Yes.
But they were facing some resistance
Right.
from leaders like Tipu Sultan.
Yeah.
He seemed to be a real problem for them.
He really embodied the complexities of this era.
Okay.
He wasn't just resisting the EIC just because, okay.
He knew their ambitions were a threat to his kingdom Mysore.
Right.
And he was a really shrewd military strategist.
Okay.
He modernized his army.
So he wasn't just some rebel leader
No.
fighting a losing battle.
Not at all.
He was really trying to protect his people.
Exactly.
What were some of the key moments in his fight against the EIC?
Well, there were these series of Anglo-Mysore wars
Okay.
that really show this back and forth struggle for power.
Okay.
One battle that really shocked the EIC was Tipu's victory at the Battle of Polalur in 1780.
Okay.
That really showed them he was a force to be reckoned with.
Right. So that must have been a real wake-up call for them.
It was.
How did they respond to Tipu Sultan?
Well, they knew they couldn't underestimate him anymore.
Okay.
So the EIC brought in Lord Cornwallis,
Okay.
who was a very experienced military leader
Right.
as Governor General.
Okay.
And Cornwallis understood they needed alliances.
So he formed these partnerships with the Marathas and the Nizam of Hyderabad.
Okay.
Because they also saw Tipu as a threat.
So it's kind of like the enemy of my enemy is my friend?
Exactly.
That seems to be a pattern with the EIC.
It really was.
Forming and breaking alliances whenever it suited them.
They were masters at it. They would play these different factions against each other, using diplomacy and military force to get what they wanted.
Okay, so did these alliances actually work against Tipu?
Well, the wars were brutal, and they dragged on for decades.
Okay.
The Third Anglo-Mysore War was especially bad.
Okay.
Cornwallis besieged Srirangapatnam, which was Tipu's capital, in 1792.
Okay.
And Tipu was forced to sign a treaty, giving up a lot of his territory, and paying a huge sum to the EIC.
That must have been tough for him.
It was, but Tipu was resilient.
Okay.
He was determined to get back what he had lost.
Okay.
He even secretly looked for alliances with other countries like France.
Wow, so he was really trying to find anyone to help him against the EIC.
He was.
It's a real David and Goliath story.
It is.
So how did this whole fight between Tipu and the EIC finally end?
Well, the final clash came during the Fourth Anglo-Mysore War in 1799.
Okay.
Richard Wellesley, who we talked about earlier, he was the governor general now, and he was determined to crush Tipu once and for all.
Okay.
So he besieged Srirangapatnam again.
Okay.
And in a tragic end, Tipu died defending his capital.
Wow, what an end for someone who fought so hard against the EIC.
He was.
What happened to Mysore after Tipu died?
Well, Wellesley, sticking with his expansionist goals, installed a puppet ruler, basically making Mysore a client state of the EIC.
Okay, so with Tipu gone, the EIC could turn their attention to another major power in India, the Marathas.
Exactly.
Can you remind us who they were?
Sure, the Marathas were a very powerful force.
Okay.
They rose to power as the Mughals declined. They controlled a huge territory, and they had a strong military, and Wellesley saw them as the last obstacle in the EIC's path to complete domination of India.
So it seems like another big clash is about to happen.
It does.
How did the EIC deal with this threat from the Marathas?
Well, Wellesley was a master strategist.
Okay.
He knew how to divide and conquer.
Okay.
In 1802, he got the Peshwa,
okay,
who was the leader of the Maratha Confederacy,
okay,
to sign the Treaty of Bassein.
Okay.
And this treaty essentially made the Peshwa a protectorate of the EIC.
Okay, so the EIC outmaneuvered the Marathas using diplomacy.
Yes.
I'm guessing the other Maratha leaders weren't happy about this.
You're right, they were outraged.
Okay.
Many refused to accept EIC dominance.
Okay.
This led to the Second Anglo-Maratha War.
Okay.
A series of really tough battles that tested the EIC's military strength.
This seems like a turning point.
It was.
In the EIC's quest for control.
It was.
Were these battles as decisive as the ones against Tipu Sultan?
Yes, they were.
Okay.
The most famous one was the Battle of Assaye in 1803.
Okay.
Where Arthur Wellesley, Richard's brother,
okay,
and the future Duke of Wellington,
wow, another big name in history,
yes,
led the EIC to a stunning victory.
It was a big win.
So were these wars as brutal and costly as the ones against Tipu?
They were.
Okay.
The human cost and the financial cost were huge.
Okay.
And there were people back in England who questioned Wellesley's aggressive expansion.
Okay.
Especially because it was driving the EIC towards bankruptcy.
So even as they were winning battles,
yes,
they were having problems back home.
They were.
It seems like their success was coming at a high price.
You could say that.
By the early 1800s, it seems like the East India Company was the main power in India.
They were.
But with all these problems and resentment,
yes,
how much longer could they hold on?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
They had defeated or outmaneuvered all the major powers in India, but their biggest challenge would come from a source they never expected, their own army.
You're talking about the Sepoy Rebellion.
I am.
This is the uprising that shook British rule in India.
It did.
What led to this massive rebellion?
Well, remember the EIC's army?
Yeah.
It wasn't just made up of British soldiers. Yeah. The majority were Indian soldiers called sepoys.
Okay.
For years, they had served the EIC, fighting in their wars, enforcing their rule.
Right.
But over time, there was this growing discontent among them.
Okay.
There was resentment over pay and conditions.
Okay.
Frustration with EIC policies.
Okay.
And a growing unease with their cultural insensitivity.
So it wasn't just one thing that caused the rebellion.
It was a buildup of frustration that finally boiled over.
Okay.
The EIC was so focused on profit and control.
Yeah.
They didn't understand the cultural and religious sensitivities of the sepoys.
Right.
They were treating them like tools.
Yes.
Not respecting their beliefs.
Yes.
Exactly.
And that brings us to the infamous greased cartridges.
Right.
This seems to be the thing that really sparked the rebellion.
Yeah.
What exactly happened?
So in 1857, the EIC introduced these new Enfield rifles,
Okay.
which required cartridges greased with animal fat.
Okay.
And rumors spread among the sepoys
Right.
that this grease was a mix of cow and pig fat.
Okay.
Now, for Hindu sepoys, the cow is sacred.
Right.
And for Muslim sepoys, the pig is unclean.
Right.
So handling these cartridges would violate their deeply held religious beliefs.
Sounds like a huge mistake by the EIC.
It was.
Was it intentional?
That's still debated by historians.
Okay.
Some say it was a deliberate attempt to Christianize India. Others say it was just a bureaucratic mess-up and cultural insensitivity.
Okay.
But regardless of their intent,
Right.
the impact was devastating.
So the sepoys saw it as a total lack of respect.
Exactly.
The sign that the EIC didn't care about their faith.
Exactly.
So this small change in equipment
Yeah.
became this symbol of everything wrong with EIC rule.
Well, exactly. It was the last straw.
Okay.
In May 1857,
Okay.
sepoy regiments in Meerut,
Okay.
north of Delhi,
Okay.
refused to use the new cartridges,
Okay.
and their defiance turned into a full-blown mutiny.
Okay.
They rose up against their British officers
Okay.
and marched on Delhi,
Okay.
the heart of Mughal rule.
So it wasn't just some small mutiny.
Yeah.
It became a challenge to the EIC's authority.
It did. The rebellion spread really quickly
Okay.
across North and Central India.
Wow.
Sepoys,
Okay.
joined by local rulers and peasants
Okay.
who had their own issues with the EIC,
Okay.
rose up in this huge wave of resistance.
So the recapture of Delhi
Yes,
seems like a major moment.
it was.
Can you talk about why it was so important?
Well, Delhi,
Okay.
even though the Mughal emperors didn't have much power anymore,
What?
still held a lot of symbolic importance.
Okay.
For the rebels, Delhi was about taking back their country,
Okay.
reclaiming their heritage.
Okay. And throwing off foreign rule.
Okay.
For the EIC, retaking Delhi was key to showing they were still in control
Right.
and crushing the rebellion.
So it was more than just a military objective.
It was a battle for the soul of India.
Wow, can you describe the fighting during the siege?
Imagine a city full of history.
Okay.
Its streets turned into battlefields.
Okay.
The rebels,
Right.
using whatever weapons they could find,
Okay.
defending their positions fiercely.
Okay.
The EIC,
Okay.
with their superior weapons,
Okay.
slowly closing in.
Wow. It sounds like a movie.
It does.
So what happened?
Well, after months of fighting,
Okay.
the EIC finally recaptured Delhi in September 1857.
Wow.
The city was left in ruins.
Wow.
But the rebellion didn't end there.
It didn't.
It raged on for another year,
Okay.
marked by incredible bravery and horrific brutality on both sides.
The Sepoy Rebellion must have left a lasting impact.
It did.
What were the consequences of this event?
It was a turning point.
In the history of British rule in India,
Okay.
it showed that the EIC wasn't invincible,
Right.
that their control was fragile,
Okay.
and it highlighted all the resentment their policies had caused.
Okay.
The British government realized how serious this was,
Okay.
and in 1858, they dissolved the East India Company
Wow.
and took direct control of India.
So the Sepoy Rebellion was the end of the East India Company, but not the end of British rule in India.
Right. It ushered in a new era
Okay.
called the British Raj,
Okay.
but the EIC's legacy remained.
Okay.
Their policies, their exploitation, their military campaigns,
Right.
all of it shaped the relationship between Britain and India.
It's been so interesting to learn about the rise and fall of the East India Company.
It is a fascinating story.
From merchants looking for spices
Yeah.
to rulers of an empire.
Right.
Their story is full of ambition and ruthlessness.
It is.
And a pretty dramatic fall.
It is.
What's the takeaway for our listeners today?
Now, the East India Company's story is a cautionary tale
Okay.
about the dangers of unchecked power
Okay.
and the terrible consequences of exploitation.
Okay.
It reminds us that history isn't just about dates and battles.
Okay.
It's about human stories,
Right.
triumphs and tragedies,
Right.
and lessons we can learn from
Okay.
and apply to our own challenges today.
Thank you for guiding us through this incredible story.
You're welcome.
And for our listeners, as you think about this tale of ambition and power and rebellion,
Yeah.
what's one question we could leave them with?
I would ask, how do we make sure
Okay.
that the pursuit of profit and power
Okay.
doesn't come at the cost of human dignity and justice?
Okay.
The East India Company story
Right.
is a reminder that we need to learn from the mistakes of the past
Yes.
and build a fairer world for everyone.